Now, the United States has officially issued a public notice imposing additional 25% tariffs on imports from India.
India's ambassador to Russia saying it will continue to buy oil wherever it gets the best deal, following President Trump's threatened penalties for buying Russian crude. The statement comes days before President Trump's 50% tariffs on India take effect on Wednesday.
US tariffs are not going anywhere, and even if they do, the US will just replace them with something else. Unka goal will always be to hamper India's growth. And why do I say so? Because the US and India have never really been friends. In fact, arguably, we are closer to enemies than friends. So why are we surprised जब the US India पे सबसे ज़्यादा tariffs apply करता है among all the major countries in the world? Well, we're surprised because we're Indians. हम हिंदुस्तानी दिल के बड़े अच्छे लोग होते हैं. तो हमें विश्वास नहीं होता कि कोई हमारा बुरा करना चाहेगा for no reason. But that's exactly what is happening. The US is harming India for a very selfish reason. Trump is simply a pawn in a very long-term game जो 1971 में पहली बार हमें दिखा था. We know that उस वक्त the US had supported Pakistan, but have we ever understood why the US has been supporting Pakistan? Well, US और पाकिस्तान की दोस्ती शुरू हुई थी somewhere in the 1960s जब US को चाइना एंड रशिया के कम्युनिज्म को स्टॉप करने के लिए एशिया में एक प्रेजेंस चाहिए थी. And the strongest presence they could come up with was Pakistan because वो दोनों को एक साथ रोक सकता था. Now, this relationship persists because of Pakistan's strategic location. See, the US needs an access into the Middle East, into Afghanistan, for example, and Pakistan is perfectly located for that. इसीलिए, the US has a lot of air bases in Pakistan that makes Afghanistan a direct access. वरना तो 1998 में जब पाकिस्तान खुद एक न्यूक्लियर पावर बना था, तो उस वक्त US and पाकिस्तान की relationship would have ended. It's only because of the Twin Towers का collapse and then the fight against terrorism that the US needed Pakistan's help again. Now the problem is, अगर पाकिस्तान का जो staunch enemy है, which is India, if we grow so much, what do you think the future of Pakistan looks like? Even if Pakistan doesn't in itself just play politics to bring us down, we know that India will eventually wipe Pakistan out, and don't think that won't happen. हाँ, अभी हमारे leaders ऐसा नहीं सोचते, अभी हमारी public ऐसा नहीं सोचती, but 10 years, 20 years down the line, अगर हम इतने ही strong country बन गए कि पाकिस्तान हमारे लिए एक बहुत ही minuscule problem रही, तो we would want to finish that problem from the roots. Someone will come in who will think along those lines, and the US doesn't want to take that risk, and that is still a smaller risk. इससे बड़ा second risk है, which is of India becoming another China. Now, China is challenging US's global dominance, right? In technology, in arms, in everything. And the US cannot afford to have another country grow at that pace. And that's exactly what India is trying to do. With our manufacturing exports, with our expertise in defense, with our services exports, we are becoming a global powerhouse, a real global powerhouse. And that again is something that the US has to stop. Otherwise, of all the countries in the world that hold any power, NATO के तो सिर्फ US ही बचेगा. Maybe you could count France. But other than that, every major country would basically be from BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, especially Russia, India, and China. Then the obvious question becomes, how does the US hurt India? Well, the answer is just as obvious. वो दो चीजें जिसने हमें ग्रो किया था, वो ही दो चीजें हमें खत्म करनी होंगी. The first being services exports and the second being manufacturing exports. And you can see that Trump is targeting both of them very smartly indeed. He is no fool. सबसे पहले, by increasing tariffs, he's making sure that India के exports are not competitive in the global market. China के tariffs अभी भी हमसे कम हैं, which means India के जो goods देश खरीद भी रहे थे, they don't need to buy that anymore. So this transition back to China is happening much faster now, and I've talked about this transition many times. Post-COVID, लोग China से India की तरफ move किए थे, and now over the last couple of years, people are moving back to China. The fact that Indian goods are now becoming expensive just speeds up that process, and that hurts India pretty bad. But that is still not the worst of what Trump has done to India. The worst of it all is what he's done with Russian oil. See, post-COVID, India was the fastest growing major economy in the world. That was majorly because we struck a good deal with Russia. हमें जो Russian oil बहुत सस्ता मिल रहा था, that was the reason हमारा inflation under control रहा. Because we could procure this oil and sell it off again as a finished product, हमारे import और export के bill का जो difference था वो बहुत छोटा रहा, जिसे हम fiscal deficit भी कहते हैं. That is the reason why the government managed to spend so much money on infrastructure, defense and everything else that has kept our growth going. And we know that India में private capex has not really picked up. अभी भी हम गवर्नमेंट के कैपेक्स पे ही ग्रो कर रहे हैं. Now if the government's bill, which in turn means the fiscal deficit, starts to grow, that means the government cannot spend as much money on India's growth. That is how our growth slows down. And Russian oil is one of the biggest hits we can take there. हाँ, कुछ लोग कहेंगे कि कितना ही डिफरेंस है, हम कुछ बिलियन ही सेव कर रहे हैं नहीं कर रहे हैं. But the deeper impact of this Russian oil is much bigger. For example, हम इस ऑयल को सिर्फ डोमेस्टिकली यूज नहीं कर रहे थे, राइट? हमारी जो OMCs हैं, ऑयल मार्केटिंग कंपनीज, वो इसी ऑयल को फिनिश करके एक्सपोर्ट भी कर रही थी एंड दे वर मेकिंग वेरी हैंडसम प्रॉफिट्स. एंड दिस प्रॉफिट वाज देन बीइंग डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड बैक टू द गवर्नमेंट एज डिविडेंड्स. These OMCs paid about 31,000 crores in dividend to the government. 31,000 crores, if removed from our GDP, you know what that does. Now imagine if these OMCs become unprofitable and cannot pay off those high dividends. That's a lot of money disappearing from the government's balance sheet. And that is how India gets really hurt by the Russian oil trade. And you can already see it happening. Indian government has already had to support OMCs with about 32,000 crores given to them for losses that they've taken over a certain product. So instead of receiving money from OMCs, अब इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को OMCs को पैसा देना पड़ रहा है. That is going to show up in the bill somewhere. वो कहीं हमारे कैपेक्स को हार्म करेगा ही आगे. These are reasons why FIs are still selling. You have to think, ऐसा क्यों है कि FIs रिकॉर्ड लो लॉन्ग पोजीशंस पे बैठे हैं? ऐसा क्यों है कि सिर्फ हमारे DIIs ही खरीद रहे हैं अभी, राइट? We can see that India का growth has to slow down because every major economy in the world is fighting against us, right? Why are they fighting against us? Because we got too ambitious a little too fast. Especially with the defense exports coming in, especially becoming self-sufficient in defense, that, while something to be incredibly proud of, was probably a step too far too soon. Because we have even our allies who export defense equipment to us, right? Russia exports defense equipment to us, France does, the US does. And these people rely on those bills to keep their economy going क्योंकि इंडिया दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा importer है defense equipment का. Now if that bill goes away, this hurts these economies pretty substantially. And then India takes away उनका other export market by ourselves exporting defense products to smaller countries, right? That is why I think we are seeing a lot of friction from global economies. That is why they're trying to slow us down. And well, I don't think they're wrong either. I would do that if I was one of those countries. This is simply trying to protect your business. Let's be capitalists here. Let's be pragmatic here, right? हम financial industry में काम करते हैं. We can't afford to be moralistic about these things. So practically speaking, if government capex is going to fall down, private capex has not picked up, our international allies will probably not support us because we are going against them, then where is growth going to come from? That is where I am being so bearish, because I don't see how India takes the next step in its growth story. There's going to be a slowdown. Post that, we might find a very good exit forward. And now for my major prediction, right? I think India की defense industry पे कोई एक बहुत बड़ा hit आने वाला है. I don't know how, I don't know कौन करेगा, and don't ask me for data to back it up, because ये एक prediction है, ये एक intuition है. Now, where does this intuition come from? If I was France, if I was Russia, if I was the US, I would not want my biggest buyer to suddenly become self-sufficient, right? And if there's something I can do about it without really dirtying my hands, I would do that. So I don't think that someone's going to start a war with India. I think quite the opposite. We'll either be made to feel very comfortable while our economy slows down so that the government can basically not spend enough money on defense, or we're going to see some corruption scam come in that shows that our defense hasn't really done what it claimed to do. But something will come in that will hurt our defense sector, the entire image of it, shaking the very foundations of what we think has been built over the last 5 years. At least there would be an attempt to do so. Now, if that does happen, well, you can always say thank you. If that doesn't, please don't make a play in the stock market on the basis of this. I'm telling you very clearly that this is just a hunch. Also, forgive me in the comments. I'm just another human trying to tell you what I believe is going to happen in the markets. Use my experience, use my knowledge to share some pointers that I think could be helpful. I don't claim to be God. I just claim to be another dude like you who works in the financial markets and understands it a little bit, having grown up with it.